Hey guys, my name is Jose Okonjo. I'm a Chattanooga-based web designer and Webflow developer. And in this video, we're talking about frequently asked questions. Now, before we get to the FAQs, just a little bit of news. One is that you might have seen an ad before this video started, and I just wanted to mention that a couple of days ago, I was able to get this channel monetized. I really hope that you guys don't mind that. It takes a lot of work. This one's a little bit shorter, but some of the other ones that are longer, it takes so much to create those. So it's just nice to have a little bit of compensation to keep this channel going and be able to do more videos. And then secondly, I was able to get the channel monetized because I crested 1,000 subscribers. It's not really a lot, but it was a big deal to me, and 4,000 hours of watch time. So that's the kind of the limit that YouTube sets to be able to monetize a channel. So I just wanted to thank you guys. A lot of you have reached out on like Twitter or email or Instagram or whatever, and have just encouraged me and really pushed me to keep going, and thanks me for the videos. So I'm just really appreciative of this little community on this channel, and I like doing this for you guys. Okay, so frequently asked questions. This is actually one of my favorite little things to build on a website, just because it's like a simple component, but it can bring a lot of value to the clients, and then you can get kind of creative with some of the animations and stuff. So we're going to keep it pretty basic here for this video, but you can use, now that we have Lottie integration and stuff like that, there are some fun things that you can do with these FAQs. I'm actually going to be doing two different styles. That's why you see two FAQ headlines. That's because we're going to be building out a list totally custom, not using any Webflow components. And then we're going to use the Webflow Dropdown component to create this list down here. I wanted to show you both so that you kind of get a sense for, okay, which one would I use in which situation, which one works better, and just kind of pick and choose for yourself which method you like best. All right, that's enough talk. Let's jump into it. All right, so for the first FAQ list, we're going to be creating the custom version, and then the second one, we're going to do the drop-down. Before we jump into developing the custom one, we created this little diagram. I kind of want to talk about the anatomy of an FAQ. So there's three elements I want to kind of draw your attention to. The first is the wrapper. The wrapper, of course, is going to hold everything. And in our collection, that's going to be the collection item. That's going to be the wrapper that will hold all of the content. And then inside of that wrapper will be two divs, a target and a pane. The target is what we're going to click on to expand the pane and make it grow. And the reason that we want to have a target that's separate from the wrapper is if we have content inside of this pane, like for example, if it was a rich text block and there were links inside of it, or if there was a button inside of it, you can put whatever you want in there, and we still want the user to be able to interact with it. And so if the if like the interactions are applied to the whole wrapper, then that's going to interfere with any kind of content that we have in here. But if we assign the animations to the target, it's going to, people already have that. That's a well-known user pattern that you kind of click on this area to make it expand or close. All right, so now that we know that, let's go ahead and hide that again. Let's jump into Webflow and add a collection list. And I'm going to link it to an FAQ collection that I've already created. And by the way, I highly recommend just in your own development work, as much as possible, before you start developing, add the collections and use real content, because if you do that, you're going to realize that there are certain things you're doing that don't fit the actual way the client will use the website. So in other words, avoid dummy content as much as possible. All right, let me jump off of that soapbox. All right, with the collection list, let's go ahead and give that a class of FAQ wrapper. And I've already got this class on another page from another tutorial, so I'm just going to add a one to make it unique to this project. And we're going to add some stylings, like we're going to push it away. Let's do like 48 pixels or so. We're going to do a max width of 806. And we're going to center it in the middle of the screen by setting the margin on the left and right to auto. And that's going to push it into the middle. All right, so now we can go ahead and add some of the content here with the collection item. That's going to be our FAQ. You know what? I should have named this list. Sorry about that. So that's going to be an FAQ list. Because the item is supposed to be the wrapper. FAQ wrapper 1. There we go. Then inside of that wrapper, we're going to have 2 div blocks. So if I twirl down the item here, you can see that there's 2 div blocks. The first one is going to be our trigger. And the second one is going to be our pane. FAQ pane. All right, there we go. Inside of the trigger, we're going to have a text block. And we're actually there's going to be one in the pane as well. And then in the trigger, let's add another div block for our button. So this is going to be FAQ button. Okay, I think that's all of the elements unless I'm wrong. Now, let's go ahead and set up the wrapper. So the first thing I want to do is give it that background color so we can kind of see our work. We're going to add a little bit of padding. And then on the left-hand side, we can actually do 16 pixels. All right. Then with the trigger, we can set it to flex. And what that's going to do, it's going to let us create this layout where the question is on the left and the button is all the way to the right. So flex, align vertically in the middle, and space between. With the button, let's give it some hard pixel values of 42 by 42. Is that what it is? Yeah, okay. And then a background color so we can see it. And it's got 4 pixels of corner radius. And I think I forgot to do that with the wrapper. I also forgot to add some margin on the bottom to separate the questions from each other. Let's go ahead and do that now. And then let's tie this stuff to the CMS. So this is going to be the question, and this is going to be the response. With the response, let's make it a P2, so it's a slightly, whoops, misspelled that. It's a slightly smaller version of the paragraph. And then let's give it a combo class of FAQ response. I want to add 16 pixels of padding just to push it away from the top edge of the button. And then I want to also add 32 pixels of padding. I don't like it when the paragraph is kind of like right below the button. So just giving it a little bit of space there. All right. Now, the next thing we need to do is add that chevron icon. And there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to use an image and one is to use an HTML embed. So I'm going to cover both because they both have their places. But to do the SVG, I would click on the chevron here and then export by setting this to SVG, clicking export, and then uploading it to my assets folder, which I've already done. And then just click and drag that into the square there. And then you can always add some alt text, chevron icon. With the button, let's make it flex as well so that we can center it in the middle of the screen, or the box. All right, so that's how you would import this using an SVG image. But there's also a way to do it using an embed. So let me go ahead and add an HTML embed. And what we want to do is we want to copy this and we want to get it out of inside there because it has to be as simple as possible. So you don't want it to be inside of any groups or anything like that. And then if I right click here, I can copy the SVG code in the drop-down menu, and I'm pretty sure that Figma and Adobe XD all have the ability to do this as well. So copy the SVG code there, and I'm just going to paste that into the embed code editor. Save and close that. And now we've got the exact same thing. So the only difference is this is an image that's being referenced in the assets folder, and this is just the actual code. But the image is actually just the code inside of the image file. So it's really the exact same thing. Now, here is the pro of using the image over the code. The pro is that it's super easy because you just upload it to your assets folder. If you need to reuse it multiple times throughout the project, you can search for it in the assets folder and find it fast. The con is that it's difficult to change the color of the SVG. So let me get rid of that. Go press 0. I've got this active state for the FAQ. So when I open up the FAQ, this turns black and the icon turns white. It's really difficult to do that if I use an image. So I'd have to use a background image as opposed to like the regular image, or use hide and opacity and all kinds of stuff. So it's just not very easy to change the color. But with the HTML embed, it is. So I'm going to get rid of the image, open that HTML embed code editor back up. And first of all, let's just delete a few things that we don't really need. So for example, we don't need this comment, we don't need the title, we don't need the description, and we actually don't even need this group. So really what we need is this polygon that has the actual like vertex points of the SVG. But the group here is just kind of like empty space. We can actually get rid of that. And we're going to get an error right away that's saying, hey, you've got a closing group tag, but no opening group tag. So we can just delete that to remove that error. Save and close. And look, it's still there. We didn't mess with it. Still showing up as it should. And then we're going to make one more change. Now, currently, the way that SVG is getting its color is from this inline style right here. So by the way, you could set that to any color that you want. But we're actually going to use current color. And by the way, unless I'm wrong, I believe this is case sensitive. So I want to make sure this is a lowercase c and this is an uppercase c. But what that is telling the browser is, I want you to get the fill color from the current font color set to this element or any parent element. I'm going to save and close. You'll immediately notice this is now the black from the text. That's a good sign. And then we're going to give this a class of FAQ chevron. Down here, I'm going to set this to something super saturated, and you'll notice as I slide this along, it's changing color along with whatever I'm setting to the font. So this is just a super neat way to tie the color of an SVG to your font color, and then you can mess with it in animations. I love that. So I'm going to click on here and get the actual color, which is a medium gray. Right, and now we're ready to go, and we're going to be able to manipulate the color of that SVG in our animation. All right, so with trigger selected, let's go ahead and add our animation. I've already added one previously, I think, so I'll have to delete it. Here we go. So let me delete this, and let me add a new one. FAQ custom open. So the first thing we need to do is get the FAQ to its initial state. Like when somebody loads the page, what do you want it to look like when it loads? Well, we don't want it to be expanded when it loads. So with FAQ pane selected, I'm going to set the initial size, and this is where we set the initial state here. We're going to set it to a height of 0 pixels. All right, so we're noticing there's some funky stuff going on, like the paragraphs are showing up. So to deal with that, let's also set the hide show property to display none. And just to make our animation a little bit smoother, we're also going to add an opacity of 0%. This is exactly how we want our questions to look when we load the page. All right, now we got to add, how do we want it to appear when somebody clicks on the trigger? So the first thing we're going to do is the hide property. We're going to set it to block. All right, so now it's showing back up, and you got to do that first before you do anything else, because the hide show property, it doesn't have a timing function. Like you can't set, see how this was grayed out or unavailable? You can't set a duration to that animation, so that's got to be done first. Then we're going to add size and opacity at the same time. Opacity has been set to 100% for us. Thanks, Webflow. And for height, instead of giving it like a hard pixel amount, we can just set it to auto. And we're kind of saying, hey, just go back to what you should be. Then with both of those selected, let's make it a duration of 0.3 just to make it a little faster. Set it to ease. And then let's test this out. All right, that looks exactly like what we want. We also want to affect the button, right? So We don't have to set an initial state for that because it's already set to the initial state, but we do want to change the background color to the button, and we want it to be this, oops, accidentally clicked that chevron there. We want it to be our dark. So let's go ahead and set that there, and then here's the beauty of what we just did with the embed. Now with text color, we can change this to white. I love that. Okay. Now with all of these selected, let's just go ahead and make sure they're all set to the correct easings. And there we go. One thing I forgot to do is with the chevron, we do want to rotate it, right? So we want it to indicate that it's needs to go back up on second click. So I'm going to rotate on the Z index 180 degrees, and go ahead and set this to the same things as always. All right, now when it opens, the chevron is rotating like we want it to. All right, so let's go ahead and preview it just to make sure that this is all behaving correctly, and it is. One thing I just realized as I was doing that was we need to make sure that people know the trigger is a clickable element. So here in the settings, the style panel, I scroll down, and under cursor, I want to change this to pointer. All right, now let's add the animations for the second click. In other words, what do we want to happen when somebody clicks on the trigger again to collapse the FAQ list? So I'm going to click Starting Animation. I'm going to duplicate the one that we already have, and then I'm going to go ahead and rename it FAQ Custom Close. By the way, on larger websites, you may have a lot of animations, so you want to give these really easy to understand names because you think you will remember what what those animations are for. But when you're like 20 pages in and there are 50 animations, you will have forgotten what goes to what. I guarantee you. All right, so let's get rid of this. We're going to move the hide show to the bottom. And I'm doing that because remember, we can't add any kind of duration to hide show. So if I did it at the top, it would all of a sudden just disappear, and it would be this really unnatural animation. So we want that to happen last. Size, I want to set that to 0 pixels. Rotate, I want it to go back to 0. Chevron, I wanted to set it back to this color. The button, I want to set it to this color. Opacity set to 0% for the pane. The last thing that you want to do is make sure that you set this, since this is a copy of the open, this is set to end by displaying block. You want to make sure you send it to display close. Now what happens if you leave it on display block is if you open this one and then close it and then try to click on this one, it's unclickable. There's an error, and that's because the paragraph from the FAQ item above it is actually rendering on top of this. So it's set to size 0 and opacity 0, but it's actually still rendering over it. So we need to go ahead and make sure that it's set to hide or display none when it closes. And let's preview that. Actually, it's not going to let us preview it because it's the second click. So we do have to go to the preview mode. And look, we're getting the pointer cursor, and this is behaving just as we expected. All right, so we do have a hover interaction where just the button gets a little bit darker on hover. But just to speed things up, I'm going to do that off screen. And when we come back, we're going to work on using the Dropdown to create the second FAQ list. All right, we're back for section 2. In this section, we're going to use Webflow's Dropdown component to kind of achieve the same thing that we did with the custom FAQ list above, but you're going to see that there are some things that Webflow has kind of added to the Dropdown component that are a little different from how we executed this above. And so I wanted to show you both so that you have the opportunity to decide, all right, which method do I like the best? Let's jump into Webflow, and we're going to start off kind of the same way that we did with the section above. We're going to add a collection list. Let's source it to our FAQs CMS collection. With the list selected, let's give it a class of FAQ list. And then inside of here, let's add a dropdown. All right, let's take a look at the dropdown and look at how Webflow has built this. You're going to notice that they've actually built it really similar to how we built this above. So they've got the dropdown, that's the component itself. That's what we called the wrapper in the section above. They've got the toggle, aka the trigger, and you can see the pointer cursor over here to the left. And then they've got the list, aka the FAQ pane. And that's got currently 3 drop-down links inside of it, which we actually don't need. And we can go ahead and just copy and paste the paragraph 2 in there. All right, with the drop-down toggle, we can actually get rid of that icon as we don't need it. But let's add a div block, and we're going to call this plus wrapper. So it's just going to hold our plus icon. And then the drop-down. Now let me turn on X-ray mode so we can kind of visualize what's happening here. But currently the collection item is the full width of the FAQ list, 806 pixels. But the toggle is not filling up the entire width. Why is that? Well, the reason is because it is by default set to inline block. Inline block means that the element will only take up as much space as it needs. Well, to remedy that, let's give it a class. We'll call it FAQ toggle and set it to, instead of inline block, set it to block. Now block means that it'll take up as much space as possible. Sorry, I actually added that to the wrong thing. So FAQ dropdown. We have to set it to block as well. All right, so now the element, because it's set to display block, is taking up as much room as the parent element will allow. One of the parent elements is FAQ list with a max of 806 pixels, which means that the dropdown is now taking up that many pixels. Oh, just noticed a slight misspelling. There we go. And I previously set the toggle to display block. If I had left that alone, we're still having the same issue. That's because it's also by default inline block. So they both need to be set to block to take up the full width. Okay. With the toggle selected, we can also use flexbox the same way that we did up above. Inline or set things to center line vertically and space between. And then with the drop down, with the toggle, sorry, let's go ahead and set that to 0. But I do want to add 16 pixels of padding to the drop down itself. We also want to add 4 pixels of corner radius, and we want to add a border all around of a black at 12%. And then if we do 8 pixels of margin bottom, we'll push all of them down a little bit. So if I just kind of preview this, you'll notice we're getting close to what the initial state should look like. Let's go ahead and tie this to the CMS. And in the plus wrapper, let's add our icons. The first thing I'm going to do is add a div block, and we'll call this plus line. It's about 3 pixels tall and 18 pixels wide, and it's got a background color of this. All right, there we are. Then to get the second line, I did a second plus line. We'll call this one vertical, and let's set its position to absolute. That way, as we make changes to its positioning, it's not going to affect the plus line without the combo class. In the transforms, let's go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees. And let's also move it up -3 pixels. Whoops. I think you have to add these one at a time. All right, I think we move this one up. There we go. The order matters in here, which is why it was looking a little funky. So when it was below, it was kind of like offset. So you just got to move it above. And there we go. So let me preview this again. Perfect. The only thing that we're missing is the hover state. So with the drop down selected, let's click on this little drop down arrow, click on hover, and then we want the line to be, I forget exactly what color this was. I don't think it's a full black. Ah, okay. So instead of 12, it's 54%. Go back to none, and then we want to make sure that we add a transition so that it doesn't go from that 12% to 54% in an instant. It just kind of eases it in slowly. So border color, 200 milliseconds is fine. All right, so now when you hover over it, it's got a nice little transition and lets you focus on the content that you're hovering over. All right, now if we click these, it's already got the the functionality available, so it's opening and closing, but it looks a little weird, and that's because of its display property. So if we go to drop-down list, we want to do a few things. First of all, we want to set the background to transparent, so we get that ugly gray color, and then we want to set its positioning not to absolute, but to static. And once it's set to static, all right, now we're getting the correct action that we were expecting. Now we could actually just leave it there. So we could just say, okay, that's our FAQ, we're done. But we want to add some interactions just to make it a little smoother, like we did here, like that. The interaction is just nice. All right, so here we have to click on the drop down so that we have access to drop-down opens. We're going to start a new animation. I've got this one down here that I was messing with before I started recording. Delete those. And let's do FAQ drop-down opens. Remember, I said be very specific with these titles. I learned that the hard way. And then we're going to do essentially the same thing that we did above, where with drop-down list, we're going to set the hide property initial state to none, size to height of 0 pixels, and opacity of 100%. Then we want to set the hide to display block. And then finally, we want to do the opacity and the size. I think I didn't set this opacity correctly. It needs to be 0% at initial state. All right, and then on height, again, we're going to set this to auto, just so that it goes back to what we originally intended. Okay, next thing we want to do is with the plus line, we want to choose the one that has the combo class. Let's go ahead and rotate that. -90, I think, or maybe it's 0. There we go, 0 degrees. And we want to make sure that the class being targeted is plus line vertical with the combo class. I think we're getting a little bit of an issue here where sometimes when you use a transform in animation and the class already has a transform attached to it, you get some errors. So so we may have to go ahead and add some initial states. So initially it's 90 degrees, then it rotates to 0, and initially let's move it -3 pixels. So I think that should take care of that rotate. Okay, that looks correct to me, I think, from here. Let's go back up to the top. Yeah. Okay. So now with all of these selected, let's go ahead and make it a duration of 0.3 and set to ease. Let's preview that. We see that our plus is becoming a minus. Everything is opening and closing smoothly. All right, let's go ahead and do the second interaction. So we can duplicate that same one, rename it closes, we can get rid of all of these. Move the hide show to the bottom, just like we did with the one above, and set the opacity to 0%. This rotate needs to go back to 90. And the size needs to go back to a pixel amount of 0. And so if we did our job correctly, this should open and close with more easing. I think we're still getting a little bit of a funky thing there with the icon. This is future Jose. The reason that the dropdown wasn't working correctly is because I'd accidentally left this move at -2 pixels. I just changed it to -3, and now it's working as intended. The reason that works is because we set the height of this line to 3 pixels, and so we got to move it up. We got to move the second one up 3 pixels to overlap exactly over the one below it. Now, okay, let's talk about the difference between these two implementations and why you might want to use one over the other. Now, the cool thing about Webflow's component is that if I have one open and I click on another one, it's going to close the one I had open previously and open this one. In other words, it only lets you have one open at a time. And if I click off the screen, it closes it. And that's something like, that's a user pattern that people are kind of familiar with, that if I click off of something, it's going to close what I previously had open. Now, this custom one that we did, it's not going to have that same effect. So if I click off, it's going to remain open. And if I click a second one, they will all remain open. I have to actively click to close it. There are situations for both, like where you may say, well, I want the questions to remain open unless they actively close it. I want them to have more control. Or you may say, wow, there's a lot of questions with a lot of content, so it'd be nice if when they clicked on a new question, the other one collapsed to keep things condensed and not too busy. So there's situations where either of these options would work well, and you kind of have to pick and choose what you think is best. That does it for this tutorial. Thank you guys so much for following along, and make sure that you subscribe and you hit the notification bell so that you know when I upload future videos. I've actually got 3 or 4 in the pipeline. I'm about 75% of the way through recording a huge one for a big page build out. So I encourage you to subscribe so you get notified when I upload those future videos. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.